Welcome to War Bios, the podcast where we delve into the most pivotal battles in history, exploring the strategic decisions, tactical innovations, and human experiences that shaped the course of warfare. Today, we're going to examine one of the most decisive conflicts in English history, the Battle of Bosworth Field, fought on August 22, 1485. This battle marked the end of the Plantagenet dynasty and the beginning of the Tudor era, with far-reaching consequences for the British monarchy and the nation as a whole. In the late 15th century, England was embroiled in a bitter struggle for power known as the Wars of the Roses, a dynastic conflict between the houses of Lancaster and York. The Lancastrian king Henry VI had been deposed by the Yorkist Edward IV, who had seized the throne in 1461. However, Edward's death in 1483 sparked a fresh wave of turmoil, as his brother Richard III usurped the throne, declaring Edward's sons illegitimate and thereby excluding them from the line of succession. Richard III, often maligned by history as a ruthless and power-hungry monarch, was in fact a skilled military commander and administrator. Nevertheless, his actions had alienated many nobles and commoners alike, who began to rally behind a new challenger, Henry Tudor, a distant relative of the Lancastrian line. Henry, who would later become King Henry VII, had been living in exile in France, where he had garnered support from the French king, Charles VIII. As Henry prepared to invade England, Richard III was busy consolidating his power and eliminating potential threats. He had already executed several prominent nobles suspected of disloyalty, including Lord Hastings, a former ally who had grown wary of Richard's intentions. The memory of Hastings' gruesome execution, beheaded on charges of treason in the courtyard of the Tower of London, sent shockwaves throughout the kingdom, instilling fear among those who dared to question Richard's authority. Meanwhile, Henry Tudor was gathering a formidable army, comprising English exiles, French mercenaries, and Scottish soldiers. The scent of opportunity wafted through the musty barracks and makeshift camps as men from all walks of life flocked to join Henry's banner. Among them were seasoned veterans of the Wars of the Roses, eager to settle old scores, and young recruits driven by a thirst for adventure and a desire to prove themselves in battle. In the summer of 1485, Henry set sail from Harfleur, France, with a fleet of ships and an army estimated to be around 2,000 strong. The salty sea air filled their lungs as they sailed across the English Channel, their eyes fixed on the horizon, where the white cliffs of Dover beckoned. He landed at Milford Haven in Wales, where he was joined by additional forces, including a contingent of Welsh soldiers led by Rhys ap Thomas, a powerful nobleman who would play a crucial role in the forthcoming battle. As Henry marched through Wales and into England, Richard III began to mobilize his own army, which was significantly larger than Henry's. The Yorkist king had mustered an estimated 7,000 to 10,000 soldiers, including seasoned veterans of the Wars of the Roses and freshly raised levies from the north of England. The sound of drums and trumpets echoed through the rolling hills and verdant valleys as Richard's army assembled, a force to be reckoned with. The two armies were now on a collision course, with Henry Tudor advancing towards London and Richard III marching to intercept him. Richard III, aware of Henry's approach, had taken up a strong defensive position near Leicester, where he could block the Lancastrian army's advance on London. The Yorkist king had chosen a site with care, selecting a location that offered natural protection and allowed him to control the surrounding countryside. The ground was fertile and flat, ideal for cavalry maneuvers, and the nearby woods provided cover for his archers and men-at-arms. However, Henry Tudor was not to be underestimated. He had a clever strategist in his camp, John de Vere, Earl of Oxford, who would play a key role in outmaneuvering the Yorkist forces. De Vere, a seasoned veteran of the Wars of the Roses, had fought alongside Henry's father, Edmund Tudor, and had earned a reputation for his bravery and tactical genius. As the two armies drew closer, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Richard III, confident in his superior numbers and defensive position, was determined to crush the Lancastrian rebellion once and for all. He saw Henry as a usurper, a pretender to the throne, and was convinced that his own claim to the crown was rightful and just. Henry Tudor, on the other hand, knew that he had to win a decisive victory if he was to have any hope of claiming the throne. The fate of England hung in the balance as these two rival claimants prepared to clash in a battle that would change the course of history. The air was thick with anticipation, as the soldiers on both sides steeled themselves for the fight ahead, their hearts pounding with excitement and fear. As the two armies faced each other on the morning of August 22, 1485, the tension was palpable, a heavy mist that clung to the rolling hills and verdant fields of Bosworth like a damp shroud. Richard III, resplendent in his armor, rode out to survey the battlefield, his eyes scanning the enemy lines with a calculating intensity, searching for any sign of weakness or vulnerability that he could exploit to his advantage. The very air seemed to vibrate with anticipation, as if the land itself was holding its breath in expectation of the carnage that was to come. Henry Tudor, meanwhile, was busy rallying his troops, his voice ringing out across the field like a clarion call, urging them to stand firm against the Yorkist onslaught. His words were laced with a sense of destiny and purpose, for he knew that this battle would decide not only the fate of the Lancastrian claim to the throne, but also the future of England itself. As he spoke, his eyes locked onto those of his men, imbuing them with a sense of resolve and determination that would carry them through the trials of the day. The battle began with a skirmish between the two armies' archers, the sound of bowstrings singing out as arrows flew back and forth across the field like deadly birds in flight. The Yorkist archers, positioned behind a screen of men-at-arms, poured a hail of arrows into the Lancastrian lines, but Henry's troops held firm, their own archers returning fire with deadly effect. The air was filled with the sound of screams and clashing steel as the two armies clashed in a frenzy of bloodshed and chaos. As the archery duel continued, John de Vere, Earl of Oxford, led a contingent of Lancastrian men-at-arms in a bold charge against the Yorkist right flank. The Yorkists, taken by surprise, stumbled backward as the Lancastrians crashed into them, their swords rising and falling with deadly precision. Richard III, enraged by this sudden turn of events, charged forward at the head of his household troops, determined to crush the Lancastrian rebellion once and for all. His horse thundered across the field, its hoofs pounding out a rhythmic beat as he bore down on Henry Tudor's position. But Henry was not intimidated. Standing tall amidst the chaos, he drew strength from the knowledge that he had the support of many powerful nobles, including the Stanleys, who were watching the battle from a nearby hill, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As Richard III approached, Henry's bodyguards closed in around him, forming a tight circle of steel that protected their leader from harm. The Yorkist king, undeterred, charged forward, his sword flashing in the sunlight as he struck down anyone who dared to stand in his way. The battle raged on for hours, the two armies clashing in a frenzy of steel and bloodshed. The sound of screams and clashing swords filled the air, the smell of sweat and death hanging heavy over the field like a miasma. As the day wore on, the Yorkist lines began to waver, their troops growing tired and demoralized by the relentless Lancastrian onslaught. Richard III, realizing that his army was on the brink of collapse, made a desperate bid to turn the tide of battle. With a small group of loyal followers, he charged forward in a last-ditch attempt to kill Henry Tudor and shatter the Lancastrian army's morale. The two leaders clashed in a fierce hand-to-hand combat, their swords locked in a deadly struggle that would determine the fate of England. The air was electric with tension as the two men fought, their movements swift and deadly, each blow aimed at the heart of the other. The outcome was far from certain, as the two armies hung in the balance, waiting to see which leader would emerge victorious. The field was littered with the bodies of the dead and dying, the ground slick with blood and mud as the survivors stumbled forward, their eyes fixed on the struggling leaders. In this moment of supreme crisis, William Stanley, a powerful nobleman who had been watching the battle from a nearby hill, made his move. With a contingent of fresh troops, he charged down into the fray, striking the Yorkist army with devastating effect. The Yorkists, already reeling from the Lancastrian onslaught, were unable to withstand this new attack. Their lines collapsed, their troops fleeing in panic as the Lancastrians and Stanley's men pursued them, cutting them down without mercy. As the dust settled, Henry Tudor stood victorious on the field, his sword still trembling with the force of his final blow. Richard III, the last Plantagenet king of England, lay dead at his feet, his body battered and bruised from the fierce combat. The battle was over, but its consequences would be felt for centuries to come. The Tudor dynasty had been born, and with it, a new era in English history. As Henry Tudor stood triumphant on the field of Bosworth, He knew that his victory was not just a personal triumph, but a turning point in the fate of England itself. He had brought an end to the Plantagenet dynasty, which had ruled England for over 3 centuries and had paved the way for a new era of peace and prosperity under the Tudors. The implications of this victory were far-reaching and would shape the course of English history for generations to come. The Plantagenet dynasty, which had once been so powerful and dominant, was no more. In its place, the Tudor dynasty would rise to power, bringing with it a new era of stability and prosperity. The Battle of Bosworth Field was a turning point in English history, marking the end of the Wars of the Roses and the beginning of a new era of peace and unity under the Tudors. As Henry Tudor stood victorious on the blood-soaked field of Bosworth, the cries of the wounded and the dying still echoing through the air, he knew that his work was far from over. The aftermath of the battle would be just as crucial as the fight itself, as he set about consolidating his power and establishing a new order in England. The first task at hand was to deal with the body of Richard III, which was taken to Leicester and buried in the Church of the Greyfriars, its humble burial, a stark contrast to the grandeur of the king's former life. As the news of Richard's death spread, Henry Tudor moved swiftly to secure his position as king. He was crowned Henry VII on August 30, 1485, at Westminster Abbey, the sacred ceremony a poignant reminder of the weight of history that rested on his shoulders. The coronation was a masterclass in symbolism, with Henry VII carefully balancing the need to assert his own authority with the need to appease the powerful nobles and bishops who had backed him. He quickly moved to establish a strong and stable government, one that would bring an end to the turmoil and strife that had plagued England for so long. One of his first acts was to marry Elizabeth of York, daughter of Edward IV and niece of Richard III, in an effort to unite the warring houses of Lancaster and York. This marriage was a clever move, one that helped to strengthen Henry's claim to the throne and pave the way for a new era of peace and prosperity in England. The union was a potent symbol of unity, one that would help to heal the wounds of a nation torn apart by conflict. As historian Polydori Virgil noted, the marriage of Henry VII and Elizabeth of York was a most wise and politic act, whereby the king did not only strengthen his own title, but also reconcile the houses of Lancaster and York, which had been at variance for so long. As the years passed, Henry VII proved to be a shrewd and effective ruler, who worked tirelessly to rebuild and restore the English economy and military. He established a strong and efficient system of government, one that helped to reduce corruption and increase stability throughout the land. His marriage to Elizabeth of York also produced several children, including the future King Henry VIII, who would go on to play a major role in shaping the course of English history. The Battle of Bosworth Field marked a significant turning point in English history, as it brought an end to the Plantagenet dynasty and paved the way for the rise of the Tudors. As historian John Speed noted, the Battle of Bosworth was a most notable victory, whereby the king did not only gain the crown, but also freed the realm from the tyranny of Richard III. Today, the Battle of Bosworth Field is remembered as a pivotal moment in English history, one that marked the end of the Middle Ages and the beginning of a new era of modernity. As visitors walk across the battlefield, they can almost hear the sound of clashing steel and the cries of the wounded, and they are reminded of the profound impact that this event had on the course of English history. The legacy of the Battle of Bosworth Field can be seen in the many historical sites and landmarks that still stand today. The battle was not just a simple clash of arms, but a culmination of years of intrigue, politics, and diplomacy. It was a reminder that even the most seemingly insignificant events can have far-reaching consequences, and that the actions of individuals can shape the course of nations. That's all for today's War Bios. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and until next time, I'm General Biography reminding you to keep marching toward victory.